Not all houses are abandoned by choice. Sometimes their owners vanish without a trace, leaving behind disturbing clues to unspeakable events. In these 8 bone-chilling true stories, we'll reveal what really happened inside these seemingly ordinary homes, and why some doors should stay forever locked. Steel your nerves as we step inside. I used to think my obsession with perfect measurements was just my OCD talking. Now I know better. That attention to detail, that need for everything to be exactly right, it saved my life. I'm a restoration specialist, been doing it for 15 years. Victorian homes are my specialty. And let me tell you about the Henderson house. The moment I walked through those grand double doors, I knew something was off. The measurements were wrong, but in the most precise way possible. I've seen hundreds of Victorian homes in my career. Their dimensions are like fingerprints, unique to each architect. But this house, it had been altered. Deliberately. The parlor wall was exactly 3.7 inches too shallow. In any other house, that wouldn't mean anything. But here, it was the start of a pattern. I noticed it in the renovation records first. Every single owner since Santo had modified the same walls, the same exact dimensions, the same materials. Everyone choosing that specific shade of vintage rose wallpaper to cover their work. That's not normal. That's not coincidence. That's design. I started taking measurements of everything. My laser level became my constant companion as I mapped every room, every corner, every space between the walls. The previous owners, they'd all been like me, detail-oriented, perfectionists. Each one had noticed the same patterns I was seeing now. Mrs. Lancaster in 1892, Edward Pierce in 1923, the Whitman family in 1956. And now me. They'd all made the same modifications, expanding some walls, shrinking others, creating spaces that shouldn't exist. I found their notes hidden behind baseboards, tucked into ventilation shafts, carved into door frames, little warnings, little clues. Don't disturb the pattern. Maintain the sequence. Keep it contained. My hands started shaking every time I uncovered another message, another set of identical measurements. The heading was getting to me, those endless hours analyzing every inch of the house. But I couldn't stop. The pattern was there, speaking to me through a century of carefully measured modifications. Then I found the original blueprints, hidden in a lead-lined box in the root cellar, and I finally understood the patterns weren't random, they were a cage. The walls weren't just walls, they were boundaries, keeping something in or out. I could feel it now, in the spaces between the modified walls. Move in, wade in, testing, looking for weak points in the geometry. The previous owners, they hadn't been obsessive. They'd been containing something that could only be held back by precise measurements, perfect angles, specific dimensions repeated in exactly the right sequence throughout the house. Their compulsive attention to detail hadn't been a disorder, it had been a defense, and now I sit here in my office, surrounded by laser levels and measuring tapes, adding my own notes to the hidden records, checking and rechecking every calculation, making sure each wall maintains its exact position, down to the millimeter. Because I know the truth now. My OCD isn't just a quirk of my personality, it's a gift, a talent that lets me see the patterns others miss. And in this house, those patterns are the only thing keeping us safe. From what, I don't know exactly, but sometimes, late at night, when the house settles, I hear something shifting in those spaces we created, testing the boundaries, looking for any imperfection in our careful measurements, any weakness in the geometric prison we've built. And I know, as long as I maintain the pattern, as long as every wall stays exactly where it needs to be, we'll be safe. But if I make one mistake, if I let one measurement slip, even by a fraction of an inch, whatever is in there might finally find its way out. So I measure, and I check, and I maintain the pattern, just like all the others before me. I've started documenting everything now, taking photographs, making videos, recording every measurement, every modification, every strange occurrence, like the way the laser level readings shift slightly when no one's watching, or how tools left near certain walls disappear, only to reappear days later in completely different rooms, covered in a strange, dark residue that won't wash off. The contractors won't work here anymore. not after what happened to Mike. He was helping me check the measurements in the East Wing, said the numbers didn't make sense, that we should tear down the walls and start fresh. He didn't understand, didn't respect the pattern. I tried to stop him, but he took a sledgehammer to the parlor wall anyway, the one that was exactly 3.7 inches too shallow. I'll never forget the sound it made, not the crack of breaking plaster, but what came after, that deep, resonating hum, like the house itself was screaming. Mike disappeared into the hole he'd made before I could reach him. Just vanished. The police found no trace of him, but I know he's still in there, somewhere in those spaces between the walls. I haven't left my apartment in 3 years, not since the accident that left me terrified of open spaces. My world became a carefully controlled environment of familiar walls and predictable shadows. I made my living photographing architectural interiors, remote shoots, controlled spaces, safe spaces. Then the letter came about Rachel, the sister I hadn't spoken to in 5 years, dead, and she'd left me everything. The lawyer said I had to come in person to sign the paperwork, to see the house. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I read his email. There are peculiarities with the property that require your immediate attention. I almost deleted it right there, but something in his tone made me pause. Rachel and I might have grown apart, but this was my last chance to understand why. The drive to her house was torture, my heart racing with every open field we passed. The lawyer kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, probably wondering why his client was having a panic attack. We finally pulled up to a Victorian farmhouse that looked nothing like the sunny place from our childhood. Rachel had transformed it. Heavy curtains covered every window. The porch was enclosed with sheets of plywood. Your sister became reclusive in her final years, the lawyer said carefully. She made extensive modifications to the property. The front door opened into darkness, and that familiar camera-ready stillness I knew so well. But something was wrong. Doors lined the hallway, each one sealed with multiple deadbolts. My sister's normally messy handwriting was scrawled across each one in neat block letters. Do not open. Evidence inside. Keep sealed. The lawyer cleared his throat. Ms. Walker spent the last 3 years of her life systematically sealing off rooms. She was quite intent that they remain undisturbed. My photographer's eye caught other details. Fresh paint on the walls, new carpeting. But those doors, they drew me in like a magnet. The first key was heavy in my hand. The deadbolts clicked open one by one. Light from my phone revealed a perfectly ordinary bedroom, except for the wall of photos, missing person posters, news clippings, and in the center, a woman's driver's license. Sarah Chen, age 32, last seen leaving work on October 15th. Blood spattered across her photo. My stomach churned as I noticed the date, exactly 1 year before Rachel's death. The second room held similar shrine, this time to Thomas Rodriguez, a local mechanic who vanished after closing his shop one night. His worn baseball cap hung on a hook by the door, still carrying the faint smell of motor oil. Each room told a story, each victim carefully chosen. A young teacher, a retired nurse, a college student who never made it home for Christmas break. 6 rooms, 6 lives erased without a trace. But it was the 7th room that changed everything. No deadbolts, just Rachel's desperate handwriting. I'm sorry. Inside, her photography equipment, her notes, detailed surveillance photos, GPS coordinates. She'd been tracking someone who'd noticed her watching. The photos showed a man, always in the background, always wearing dark clothes and carrying a leather bag. His face carefully hidden from view. But in the final photo, he was looking directly at Rachel's camera. A face I recognized, the local business owner who'd been so friendly when I'd visit Rachel, who'd always ask about her work, her photography, who'd mentioned just last week how tragic her death was. When the lawyer brought me here, the pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. Rachel hadn't just been documenting the disappearances, she'd found the killer, and he'd found her. Now her evidence was mine, the weight of it pressed down like stones. I couldn't go back to my safe apartment and pretend this wasn't real. Those families deserved answers. Rachel deserved justice. So I did what photographers do. I documented everything, created backups, secured the files in ways that would guarantee exposure if anything happened to me. Then I bought my own cameras, my own locks, started watching the watcher. My agoraphobia doesn't matter anymore, not when I know what's at stake. He's still out there, still hunting. But now I'm hunting too, following Rachel's leads, building on her work. Some nights I wake up to the sound of someone testing my door locks. Other times I catch glimpses of him, watching me from across the street, waiting. But I'm not hiding anymore. Rachel chose to seal those rooms to protect the evidence, to make sure someone would find it, find him, and every day I get closer. The irony isn't lost on me that my fear of open spaces led me to uncover these dark enclosed secrets, that my sister's final gift wasn't the house at all, but the chance to finish what she started, to bring light to these sealed rooms, even if it kills me too. I still wake up some nights wondering if I made the right choice. That's what happens when you discover something that could ruin lives or save them. I never wanted to be a debt collector, not really. But after my divorce 2 years ago, I needed something stable. Being a newly single woman in my 30s, I couldn't afford to be picky. My mother thought I was crazy taking this job. A nice girl like you shouldn't be doing such harsh work, she'd say. But I was good at it. Too good, maybe. My boss called me the Ice Queen because I never let emotion get in the way of doing my job. The designer blazers and high heels helped, my armor against the tears and pleas, until that first hidden room. It was just another foreclosure inspection, a sprawling Victorian in the nice part of town. The owners had cleared out weeks ago, leaving behind that distinct empty house smell, dust and regret. I was doing my final walkthrough, my heels clicking against the hardwood floors, when I noticed something odd about the master bedroom wall. The baseboard didn't quite line up. There was this tiny gap, barely visible unless you were looking for it. I probably wouldn't have found it if I hadn't been so thorough. That's when I saw the latch. My heart started racing, my perfectly manicured nails digging into my palms. I knew I should just note it in my report and move on, but something made me pull it. The wall swung open like it was eager to share its secret. The hidden room was small, maybe 6 by 8 feet, but what I found inside, God. Photographs, documents, USB drives, all meticulously labeled with names I recognized, names that appeared in charity galas and business journals, the same names that signed my checks, the same people who hired my firm to collect their debts. I told myself to close the door, walk away, fix my lipstick, and pretend I never saw it. But then I found another hidden room in the next house, and the next, each one filled with more evidence, sexual harassment, embezzlement, tax fraud, worse things that made my stomach turn. They were all connected, all these wealthy clients, using foreclosures to hide their secrets, using people like me to protect them. That's when the notes started appearing on my desk. Stay in your lane, sweetheart. Then the late night calls, the car that followed me home. They knew I knew, but they didn't know everything, not yet. My experience as a collector taught me one thing: always keep leverage. So I started making copies, taking photos, documenting everything in those hidden rooms. The next house was the worst, a colonial revival on Maple Street. The hidden room there wasn't just filled with documents. There were blueprints, detailed plans of every foreclosed property in our portfolio, dates times names of contractors who built these secret spaces, a whole network exposed in neat little folders. I recognized one of the contractors' names. She'd died in a car accident 6 months ago. The police called it a drunk driving incident, but now I knew better. I started looking closer at the documents, connecting the dots, the same shell companies appearing over and over, the same offshore accounts. A pattern emerged. These weren't just random acts of corruption. This was organized, methodical, a system designed to protect the powerful by destroying the vulnerable. I thought about all the families I'd helped evict, the single mothers, the elderly widows, all the lives I'd helped ruin, thinking I was just doing my job, following the law, but the law was just another hidden room, a space where the wealthy could store their sins. Last week, they upped their game. Someone broke into my apartment. Nothing was taken, but my clothes were moved in my closet, my jewelry box slightly repositioned, my favorite perfume bottle turned just a few degrees. A warning. Then my sister called. Someone had been asking questions about her kids at their school. That's when I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I spent 3 days organizing the evidence, creating backups, writing detailed explanations. I sent packages to journalists, law enforcement, advocacy groups, people who couldn't be bought or scared into silence. The last package, the most damning evidence, I sent to someone they'd never suspect, someone who lost everything in one of these foreclosures, someone who has nothing left to lose. I don't know if I'll still have my job tomorrow or if they'll come for me. But for the first time since my divorce, since I became the ruthless collector they wanted me to be, I feel like I can breathe again, even if it's my last breath. At least it's honest. The funny thing is, now that I've done it, now that I've exposed their secrets, I sleep better than I have in years. I've stopped wearing my power suits, stopped hiding behind perfect makeup and practiced smiles. Because sometimes, the only way to find redemption is to burn everything down and start again. I know they're watching me. I can feel their eyes. God, I can't believe I'm actually telling this down. You probably think I'm just another disgraced reporter making stuff up again. And honestly, I wouldn't blame you. What happened with those sources at the Tribune? That's on me. I screwed up. Bad. But this thing I'm about to tell you, I almost wish I was making it up. I really do. So, after the whole journalism scandal blew up in my face, I ended up crawling back to my hometown like a total cliche. You know how it goes, living off instant ramen, avoiding old high school friends at the grocery store, that kind of thing. I probably would have just wallowed there forever if I hadn't noticed something weird about the rentals in my neighborhood. See, I've always been nosy, comes with the territory, I guess. My mom used to say I'd stick my nose where it didn't belong until it got stuck there permanently. Guess she was right about that one. Anyway, it started with this old Victorian house on Maple. Real estate agents probably call it charmin', but really it's just old and creepy. That's where I first saw her, just sitting there on the porch every single morning, wearing these huge cardigans even though it was like 90 degrees out. Dark hair, mid-30s maybe, but something about her eyes. When she smiled at me, this sad little smile, my whole body just went cold, like my instincts were screaming at me that something was just wrong. Then boom, she was gone. No moving truck, no goodbye to the neighbors, nothing. I probably would have forgotten about it if I hadn't seen her again a few weeks later. Well, sort of her. At first I thought I was going crazy because this woman had blonde hair, slightly different face, but something about her was exactly the same. The cardigan, that smile, the way she just sat there. I started to keep in track after that. Call it journalist instinct, or maybe just plain old obsession. But the pattern was weird as hell. She'd show up at a rental property, always alone, always with a different name, always telling the landlords this heart-wrenching story about escaping an abusive ex. They'd feel bad for her. She'd pay cash up front, and 3 months later, gone. Here's the really messed up part, though. When I tried asking the landlords about her later, they'd get this weird glazed look, like trying to remember a dream that keeps slipping away. I probably should have left it alone. I mean, my reputation was already trashed. Who was going to believe me anyway? But I couldn't stop digging. I started keeping this crazy detailed journal. Times, dates, names she used. Even tried taking pictures, but they never came out right. Always blurry or weirdly distorted, like she was flickering somehow. God, that sounds insane when I tell it down. The worst part was when I finally got up the nerve to knock on her door. Told myself I was just being neighborly. She invited me in for tea and, okay, you ever walk into a place and just know something is deeply, fundamentally wrong? The whole house was empty except for one chair, one table, and these newspaper clippings. Hundreds of them, all over the walls, all about missing women, and in every single photo I could see pieces of her, or maybe pieces of who she used to be. I don't know. I got out of there so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. Spent the next week going through every missing persons report I could find. Women disappearing for decades, each one followed by mysterious short-term rentals, each rental occupied by someone who looked just a little bit like the woman who vanished before. And now she's moved in right across from my apartment. Red hair this time, but those eyes, those empty, deep eyes. When she caught me watching her yesterday, she smiled that smile, like she's been waiting for me all along. This morning there was a note under my door, "Your turn next," written in this perfect, creepy cursive. So I'm writing this all down, not because I think anyone will believe me, but because, well, if you're reading this and you see a woman who kind of looks like me, but not quite, wearing a cardigan in the middle of summer, don't look too closely at her eyes. Don't ask questions. And for God's sake, don't drink her tea. Because by then I'll just be another clipping on her wall. Another sad story she tells the next landlord. Another face she almost wears. And somewhere out there, some other poor idiot will start noticing things they shouldn't. Start asking the wrong questions. They'll find themselves sitting in that empty room, drinking tea with someone wearing tragedy like a second skin. And this whole twisted story will start all over again. Oh God. I think I hear knocking at my door. No, not knocking, more like scratching, soft and steady, like cardigan wool against wood. The sound's getting louder now. I can see a shadow under the door, moving in a way shadows shouldn't move. Like it's breathing, or maybe laughing. I should run. I need to run. But my legs won't. Wait, is that the sound of a key turning in the lock? I should have known something was wrong when I found his camera. James never went anywhere without it. And there it was, just sitting in his car. That's what keeps me up at night now. That and the house he watched, say. I'm an insurance investigator, have been for 12 years. I deal with death every day, car accidents, fires, break-ins gone wrong. But nothing prepared me for investigating my own husband's case. The police called it an accident, a simple fall down the stairs at that abandoned Victorian on Cedar Street. But James was careful, always careful, especially when photographing old buildings. That's what he loved most, capturing decay, beauty in broken things. The day after the funeral, I finally opened his laptop. I needed to write thank you notes to everyone who sent flowers, but when I opened his photos folder, I felt sick. Hundreds of pictures, all of the same house. That house, the one where the timestamp showed he'd photographed it every single day for the past year. Different angles, different times, different weather, but always focused on the third floor window. The one with the red curtain. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I kept staring at those photos, looking for what he saw, what made him go back day after day until... I noticed something in one of the shots from last month, a face, pale, watching through that window. I checked the next photo. There it was again, and the next, getting closer each time. Until the final photo, taken the day before James died. The curtain was drawn back, the window wide open, the face gone. I'm going to that house tomorrow. I have to know what James saw, what he was trying to prove, why he kept going back. The insurance company wants to close his case, rule it an accident and move on. But I can't, not until I know the truth, not until I understand why my husband spent a year watching that window. And what was watching, I keep thinking about what he told me that last morning. How distracted he seemed, the way his hands shook when he grabbed his camera. Some things are meant to stay buried, he said, but sometimes they don't want to stay that way. I didn't understand then. I think I'm starting to now. The house is scheduled for demolition next week. I don't have much time, but I have his camera and I have his photos, and tomorrow I'm going to find out what my husband died trying to expose, even if it kills me too. 'Cause the thing is, I've started seeing that face, not just in his photos anymore, but in my windows at night. Getting closer, always closer, watching, waiting, like it knows I know, like it's daring me to look deeper. To find the truth about what really happened to James, the truth about what's really in that house, the truth about why some buildings aren't meant to be photographed, and why some mysteries should stay buried. Detective Morrison called this morning, said they found something in James's office. A journal full of notes about the house, about its history, the deaths, the disappearances, all connected to that third floor window, that red curtain. He was building a case, gathering evidence, but of what? The last entry was from the day he died. Just 3 words. They saw me. I'm at the house now, standing in the overgrown yard. The sun is setting, casting long shadows through broken windows. Each step up the creaking porch feels like a mistake, but I have to know, have to understand. The front door is unlocked, as if it's been waiting for me. The air inside is thick with decay. Dust motes dancing in fading light. Second floor now, then the third. my flashlight beam catching cobwebs and peeling wallpaper. And there it is, that window, that curtain, moving slightly in the still air. Something crunches under my feet. Glass, from a broken picture frame. The photo inside, faded but clear enough. A family, standing in this very room, all smiling, all staring at the camera, except one, the figure in the back, blurred, wrong somehow. My hands are shaking as I lift James's camera, pointed at the window, and through the viewfinder I see, oh God, I see what he saw, what he tried to warn me about, what's been waiting all this time, for someone else to look, to see, to understand. They're here, they've always been here, trapped in the photos, in the frames between moments, in the spaces where light meets shadow, and now they see me too. My finger presses the shutter, one last photo, one last truth, one last chance to tell their story, the story of the ones left behind, trapped between seconds, between heartbeats, between the flash and the fade. James knew, he understood. That's why he kept coming back, not to expose them, but to free them. And now, as I lower the camera, as I see their faces emerging from the shadows, their hands reaching out, I finally understand too. Some stories don't end, they just change photographers. I never meant to find it, but once I saw the pattern, I couldn't unsee it. The numbers kept screaming at me from my screen until they became all I could think about, all I could see. Data analysis is my whole world, finding correlations others miss. That's what makes me good at my job. That's why they hired me at the county records office. Despite my difficulties with office politics and water cooler small talk, most people don't understand how I can stare at housing data for hours, tracking permit applications, comparing architectural plans. But I see stories in the numbers, stories nobody else notices. That Tuesday night start like any other. My cat Tesla curled up in his usual spot on my desk, right next to my left monitor. Always the left one, never the right. The soft glow of my screens illuminated my home office as I worked through another batch of renovation permits. Everything was organized just the way I liked it. Color-coded spreadsheets, perfectly aligned windows, my coffee mug exactly 2 inches from my keyboard. I was deep in my routine, everything normal, until I noticed something odd about a house on Pine Street. The modifications didn't match any permits on file. This happens sometimes, people renovating without proper documentation. But these changes were different, precise, mathematical, almost artistic in their attention to detail. I dug deeper, found another house with the same unauthorized changes, then another, and another. My hands started shaking as I mapped the connections. All the houses had identical modifications, measurements precise down to the millimeter. Alcoves built into load-bearing walls, unusual changes to the ventilation systems, custom panels installed in basement rooms, changes that shouldn't exist without permits. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. In every single house, the owners had vanished. Missing persons reports filed exactly 3 months after the work was completed. No bodies, no evidence, just gone. Like they'd been erased from existence. I couldn't sleep that night, or the next. My mind wouldn't stop racing, connecting dots, seeing patterns everywhere. I started digging into the contractor records, cross-referencing dates, locations, measurements. The work was too perfect to have been done by different people. It had to be the same person, someone with an obsessive eye for detail, someone who understood precision the way I do. Everything led back to one name, a master builder known for his flawless craftsmanship. His reputation was legendary in the industry. Every project, perfect, designed to last forever, just like he preserved his other projects. I knew I should report my findings. And go to the police, but what would I tell them? That I'd found a pattern in housing data that suggested something terrible. They'd never understand, never see what I could see. I needed proof. That's why I went to the empty house on Maple Drive. It was the most recent one, still waiting for its 3-month mark. The lock was new, recently changed, but I had the code from the county records. The interior was immaculate when I stepped inside. Every surface gleamed in the beam of my flashlight. The modifications were there, just like the others. Perfectly measured alcoves, seamless panels in the walls, custom ventilation grates that didn't match any manufacturer's specifications. I ran my fingers along the edges, searching for the seams I knew had to be there, my heart pounding as I traced the patterns I'd memorized from blueprints and permit applications. That's when I heard it. A soft click behind me, the sound of the front door opening, then closing. Footsteps, precise, measured, getting closer, the rhythm of them perfectly spaced like a metronome. I knew who it was before I turned around. He stood in the doorway, tall, elegant, impeccably dressed, his silver hair perfectly styled, not a wrinkle in his tailored suit, a leather toolbox in his hand, well-worn but immaculately maintained. Fascinating, isn't it? His voice was soft, cultured, like warm honey over broken glass. The pursuit of perfection, the need to make things permanent. He took a step forward. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs. Your analysis, it's quite impressive. Such attention to detail. You understand, don't you? The beauty of precision. Another step, each one exactly the same distance as the last. My back hit the wall, one of his walls, with his modifications. We could create something truly remarkable. Together, your mind, your eye for patterns, combined with my expertise. I could smell his cologne now. Expensive, subtle, perfect. Think of what we could achieve, the patterns we could create. Permanent, preserved, perfect. I never meant to find the pattern, but I did, and now he's found me. The police won't find anything. Of course, his work is too perfect for that. Someone else who understands patterns, who can connect the dots. I never thought being a code enforcement officer could lead me to uncover something so dark. Looking back, those condemned properties were like pieces of a twisted puzzle, and I was the only one who could see how they fit together. It started when the budget cuts hit our department. Our small town council said they needed to trim the fat, make tough choices about what really mattered. I was desperate to prove my worth, show that our community needed someone checking up on these derelict buildings. That's why I started doing extra inspections, going beyond the basic checklist, working overtime without pay. The first house seemed normal enough, just another abandoned property on Maple Street with peeling paint and broken windows. But something felt off about the layout inside. The furniture was arranged too perfectly, like a stage set waiting for actors. Every detail felt deliberate, calculated. A coffee cup on the kitchen counter with a thin layer of dust. A newspaper dated 3 months ago, spread open to the crossword. Half completed, someone had taken the time to make this place look naturally abandoned. I documented everything like usual, took my photos, filed my report. I even noted the strange placement of things in my comments, though I didn't know why it bothered me so much then. The next week brought me to the second house across town. Different neighborhood, same eerie feeling. This time I noticed more details. A chair positioned just so, facing the window, marks on the floor that didn't match the furniture, a mirror angled to catch the reflection of the street, and most unsettling, a collection of local papers all featuring stories about missing persons. My hands were shaking when I checked my old files. 3 people had gone missing in the past year. Each disappearance happened within days of me inspecting a property nearby. The first was a college student, vanished after a late-night study session. Then a night shift nurse, never made it home from work. Most recently, a delivery driver who disappeared during his regular route. I started digging deeper, cross-referencing dates, locations. The pattern emerged like a nightmare coming into focus. Each condemned house was meticulously staged, created to establish the perfect timeline. The perfect alibi, that chair by the window. It let someone watch the street without being seen. Those floor marks, they showed where things had been moved, cleaned, hidden. The mirrors were positioned to watch approaching cars or people without standing near the windows. I was helping document their alibis without even knowing it. My inspection photos were proof that these places were empty, abandoned. Except they weren't, not really. They were crime scenes in waiting. Or worse, crime scenes already used. The third house confirmed my worst fears. It was on Oak Drive, a quiet street where people kept to themselves. Everything looked normal at first glance. Standard deterioration, broken gutters, overgrown yard. But inside, I found something that made my blood run cold. A wall calendar marked with dates, red circles around specific days, days that matched perfectly with my inspection schedule, and the disappearances. Someone knew when I would come. They were using my routine against me, using my documentation to create their cover story. I spent that night poring over every inspection report I'd filed in the past year. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Each house had subtle signs of staging, things most people would overlook, but together they painted a picture of methodical planning. Whoever was behind this knew exactly what they were doing. They understood how code enforcement worked, how we documented things, what we looked for, and more importantly, what we might miss. My throat gets tight when I think about how many properties I still haven't inspected. How many more perfectly staged rooms might be out there, waiting. The most terrifying part? The staging is getting more sophisticated, more detailed, like they're learning, adapting their technique with each new location. I've taken my findings to the police, but they don't see the connections. They think I'm paranoid, seeing things that aren't there, making connections between random events. The detective just patted my hand, told me budget cuts were stressful for everyone. But I know what I saw, and sometimes, late at night, I wonder if someone is watching me through my own windows now, waiting to make me disappear too, just like the others. After all, I've seen too much, connected too many dots. I've started taking different routes home, she said, and varying my inspection schedule, looking over my shoulder everywhere I go, because in this town, my inspection reports might already be setting up the perfect alibi for my own disappearance. The worst part is knowing that somewhere out there, someone is procuring another house, another stage set, another perfect alibi, and tomorrow I might have to inspect it. I never wanted to be right about the patterns. Being colorblind made me good at my job. I could capture the textures and contrasts in empty houses that other photographers missed. But now I wish I'd never noticed what was hidden in plain sight. It started last winter with the Victorian on Maple Street. The real estate agent had warned me about the condition, said the pipes had burst during a cold snap, left the place to rot for almost a decade. I remember the crunch of dead leaves under my boots as I made my way up the porch steps. The house had that distinct smell. You know the one, decades of memories trapped in damp wood and moldering wallpaper. I was doing my usual walkthrough, documenting every room for the listing. Nothing special, just another abandoned property, waiting for someone to bring it back to life. The late afternoon light filtered through grimy windows, casting strange shadows across water-stained floors. That's when I saw it. In my viewfinder, the peeling wallpaper in the master bedroom formed a perfect grid. Too perfect. My camera picked up what others would miss. The slight variations in the gray tones that form numbers. Coordinates. My hand started shaking so bad, I nearly dropped my camera. I'd seen enough true crime documentaries to recognize latitude and longitude when I saw them. I almost deleted the photos right then, almost walked away and never looked back. But something made me check those numbers. That's how I found the first body. The police said the remains had been there for 30 years, buried exactly where those numbers led. Just off a hiking trail, under an old oak tree. They told me I had a good eye for detail, said my photos helped crack a cold case. I told myself it was a coincidence. I kept working, kept photographing empty houses with their crumbling walls. But then I saw it again. In an abandoned farmhouse just outside the city limits, the kitchen wallpaper, stripped away by time and neglect, revealed another pattern, more numbers, another body. And again, in a condemned apartment building downtown. The patterns were everywhere once I knew how to look, speaking to me in shades of gray that others couldn't see, leading me to more sites, more victims. The worst part? The wallpaper patterns, they're all connected. Different houses, different decades. But the same killer left their signature in the walls. I started researching the properties, tracing ownership records, building permits, looking for any connection. The houses were all renovated between 1985 and 1995, different contractors, different owners. But one name kept appearing in the city records. A wallpaper supplier that went out of business in '96, the company's owner vanished that same year. Nobody believes me when I try to explain. They just see random decay, peeling paper, and water stains. The detective handling the cold cases started avoiding my calls after the fourth site. said I was seeing patterns where there weren't any. But I see the truth now. The killer knew someone would eventually notice. Someone who sees the world in shades of gray, just like they did. Someone who could appreciate their artistry, their attention to detail. Last week, I found another pattern while photographing a century-old colonial revival. These numbers are different. They're not coordinates, they're dates, future dates. And there's a message with them this time. You see what I see. Now you'll help me create new patterns. I haven't slept since then. Every time I close my eyes, I see those numbers floating in the darkness. The next date is tomorrow. I've stopped taking real estate photos, changed my phone number, moved in with my sister. I've covered all the wallpaper in her house with sheets. But I can still feel the patterns underneath. Waiting, watching. I know it won't matter. The killer found me through my work, through my unique way of seeing the world. And now they're waiting for me to continue their legacy. The patterns are everywhere I look now, in wallpaper, in fabric, in the tiles of my sister's kitchen floor, in the cracks spreading across her bathroom ceiling, all of them whispering numbers, coordinates, dates. Sometimes I catch myself tracing patterns in the condensation on my bedroom window, my fingers moving on their own, drawing coordinates I've never seen before, places I've never been, but places I know, places where future patterns will emerge. I think I'm starting to understand why the killer chose this method. When you see the world without color, everything becomes a pattern, a code waiting to be broken, a message waiting to be revealed. The human eye can distinguish millions of colors, but I only see a fraction of them. Maybe that's why I was chosen. Because I understand that true patterns exist in the spaces between colors, in the subtle variations of light and shadow that most people never notice. I should go to the police again, show them my photos, make them understand.